So, hey everybody, welcome. We have a few topics. Yep, yeah, I had it muted just for a minute, so sorry about that. But now we're ready to rock and roll. So let's talk about a couple of things here. So we're going to start our first session of Adventurers League starts tomorrow night at my local game shop. I'm DMing this season. I have no idea who the players are. So that's fine. We're going to get assigned those tomorrow night, and we'll just see what gets put together. So, how do you prep for something like that? I'm not worried about the party at this point. The first chapter of the adventure is fairly straightforward, and I'm sure I'll be able to just adjust on the fly for whatever they come up with. I will say that there's probably a bunch of administrative stuff that's going to happen before we actually get to gaming. So I'm planning, I probably won't plan to get as deep into the adventure as I might normally on a regular session. And then on top of that, I am going to add a little more administrivia, add a little more overhead to the beginning of the session. But I think it's going to pay off. So let's dive into that. So let me just share with the chat here. Let me get the Dropbox link. We actually set up a Dropbox folder here for you guys, and let me put that in the chat. So if you look, right now all of the saving throw files, all the Storm King's Thunder files that I have done or talked about is in this Dropbox folder. So you can pop that open. You're going to see a couple things in there. Let's take a look and see what we actually have in there. So last week I showed you the encounter keys that I did for Nightstone. It looked like that, and so the main thing is I wanted to keep it short. I don't want this to be a big burden. I just want a quick. This is designed to kind of like sketch out like who's this person who's playing and what kind of like what's their skew, where are they at. So the very first thing is just experience level, right? And what have they played? Have they played it a lot, a little, or they haven't played it at all? So I just want to get an idea with that first question. Are they familiar with 5e? Have they watched it? That actually could be something that I could add, a column that I could add into this questionnaire. I've watched it, I've never actually played it. We had a player come in last year who was like, well, I watched stuff online and it sounded so much fun that I had to come into the store and try it. And I think we're going to have a certain percentage of those people. So 5e, 4e, 3x Pathfinder, 2e AD&D, or other if they come, I want to know if they come at this thing from a different RPG background. So, if they're somebody who's played Vampire or, back in the day, or they play Fate, or they play the Cypher System or Numenera or whatever, their Dragon Age, whatever their brand of RPG is, if they've got some other indie experience or a different system, then I want to kind of like get tuned into that too. So I have an idea of, maybe how they're used to the system working. So that's just sort of a very straightforward experience level type of question. So that's that. The next question is, I usually play the blank, right? So frontline fighter, ranged attack specialist, support / healer, trickster / sneak, utility character, which I would kind of consider certain types of clerics, or the bard, maybe the druid or ranger. I guess the ranger and the bard are what I consider more utility characters. Or if you make a rogue who's more of a skill monkey than potentially like the sneaky fighter guy, right? So so I just kind of want to get an idea of like this is sort of getting at what's their play style. Are they used to being the tank up front? Are they used to kind of hanging back and providing air support or whatever? Like, what's that? And there's always the guy who's like, I just play whatever, I don't care. Okay, that's a perfectly valid choice. They have some other feeling. But that just sort of gives me like the composite of like, okay, where's this party gonna fall? And the thing is, in fifth edition, I find that a balanced party is not clutch anymore, right? It is not key to what's happening. If you don't have a, you know, my regular home game, they don't have a cleric, and largely that's fine. You know, the only times that it really bites them is maybe some mid-combat healing, but it hasn't been an issue so far. I've tried to give them items or, you know, special kind of like one-trick single-use type of things to kind of make up for it. They don't use them. Maybe I just don't put tough enough fights to them. But that's in fifth edition. I don't know that it's as important to have the iconic wizard, fighter, cleric, you know, rogue type of 4 key pillars. So that's that. I just want to get an idea of what they're used to. So this next question seems like it's about one thing, and it's actually not, right? The game is most fun at low levels with gritty fights and barely surviving by the skin of your teeth. At mid levels, where you have adequate abilities, but any fight can become a challenge, or at high levels, where great power leads to epic battles. Now, on the surface of it, you might think to yourself, well, this is just like, what sweet spot do these people love, you know, for their character level? Like, you know, what kind of like XP gauge or throttle should we put on the experience so that maybe either they like stay at the low end and like keep pushing along, or, you know, should we, you know, like they do in the book, like let's power level you to 5th level and then see where it goes from there. That's sort of what this question, like that's one thing you can take away from this question is like, oh, these guys, you know, they want a power level. You can't, the thing is you can't really do that in Adventurers League, right? You can't, you have some domain over how much XP you award, but, you know, a lot of it is just basically like what the encounter did and whatnot. Now there's a lot of milestones in Storm King's Thunder, so I don't know that that's as true as maybe it was in earlier seasons. But that's something that like at the end of chapter 1, they're going to be 5th level. That's just the way that it works. So this question is not actually so much about what level they enjoy playing. Certainly a takeaway, but it's not. The question is really trying to get at how much rest do we want to give the party? What types of fights do they want to have? So my takeaway from this question is, if they say, oh, at low level, I like really low level combat with gritty fights and you're barely surviving by the skin of your teeth. Great. I'm never giving you like a long rest until like 3 sessions or whatever. Like I'm going to stretch the resources thin and try and get you into trouble as much as possible. If they say mid-level, all right, well, that's just sort of your like average, you know, I'm going to be a little stingy maybe with short rests and give them some challenge, but regardless of what level they are, I'm not going to be super generous with the amount that they're rested. Because in my experience, like what really determines how difficult an encounter is how many of your short rest, long rest, recharge abilities you have at your disposal, right? So the best way to challenge a party is to drain them of rests, you know, with a couple encounters that eat some resources, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh man, I really need to get those maneuver dice back. Like what I would be doing a lot better if I could have those things. It's a little bit of a dirty trick, not necessarily dirty, but you can get in an encounter that's outpaced if you play this on the extreme end of the spectrum, where not only have they not had a long rest, but they've not had like a short rest in like 3 or 4 encounters. If they have not been pacing themselves with the use of those abilities, you know, they can get in real trouble. So to me, that's your best way of kind of like judging where the party is at and how up for a fight they are and what their survivability and their odds are, is like, okay, when was the last time I gave them a short rest that actually got them some stuff? So that's what this question is about, really. It's not about what level do you like to play. It's how much should I string you out on exhaustion, or on short rest, not game technical exhaustion. So that's that question. Alignment is the backbone that defines a character, has some wiggle room, it's a guideline, or gets in the way. I'm glad it's optional. This really kind of, again, is one of those questions that more gets at like how letter of the law is this character, kind of how black and white do they see the system versus how casual are they with their role playing and stuff like that. So classic scenario is you have to interrogate, a bunch of goblins that you've captured. What sort of methods are you going to employ? Do you have to send the paladin out of the room in order to accomplish this, or basically kind of like how loosey-goosey are you on interpreting a world that was originally designed to be a world where good and evil were sharply defined game statistics that had meaningful impact in the game system. So that's what's in there, is like how much is what's on their character sheet going to inform what they're doing. So those actual like ideals and bonds and flaws and stuff like that, do they care? Do they actually care? Or is it just a square on their character sheet that they had to fill out, and so they picked something and that was that? Or they rolled a d8 and got a result. So that's really kind of what that question is about. I mean, I'm not sure I'm exactly happy with that question, but because it does sort of presume a level of sort of old school background that may not necessarily be there with somebody who's walking in who's 22. So the question itself might be a little bit flawed or be a little bit biased. We're not doing rocket science, so who cares? It's just a checkbox on a piece of paper at this point. So that's that. Next question. So this is a nice, I thought this was an interesting kind of hypothetical. Your party encounters a bald man in a red cloak pulling items from a scorched and burning wagon. You, number 1, draw your blade and challenge him to immediately stand down. 2, hail him but keep one hand on your weapon. 3, slip into the underbrush and observe. 4, distract him with a bluffed up story while the party moves in closer. Or 5, make a knowledge check to see if you know any relevant lore that might reveal more about what's going on. So what's going on with this question? And I want, for most of these things, I want these people to like check one box that matters most to you, right? Don't do multiple choice. It doesn't actually help. Like make a decision. So this is really honestly getting back to something that we talked about in our preview session, player style. Okay, so what type of player are you? Draw your blade and challenge him to immediately stand down. Probably they fit into, if you look on like page 6 of the DMG, probably fits into like that instigator / fighter type of player. And that's fine. Like there's no wrong answer with these things. That's the one thing I want to impress with the players when they sit down, is like just fill it out, and it doesn't matter. Like I just want to know. It's not like, oh, you check the wrong box and the bald man murders you. Like it doesn't work that way. Hail him but keep one hand on your weapon. That's sort of like your standard. It honestly doesn't tell me a whole lot about your play style, other than like, oh, I'm conventionally minded. I'm not going to be super aggro. I'm cautious, but I'm interested in what's happening. So that doesn't necessarily have a huge play style attached to it. Slip into the underbrush and observe. Right, so this person is clearly like sneaky. They're probably tactical. They're gonna have a mind on like, how can I get myself into the best position to do the maximum amount of damage. So they're definitely a very like tactics-oriented type of player, in my opinion. Distract him with a bluffed-up story while the party moves in closer. to me, this response indicates that the players are classic like role player. They love making something up on the spot. They love fooling, NPCs. They're somebody who, this isn't necessarily like they can see the tactical advantage to doing something which mechanically is, probably just relying on a bluff check or on the DM going, yeah, that was good role playing, so it works. So that kind of, tips their hand a little bit. That's probably an RPG, a role-playing type of player, and great. That's what I want to know. And then finally, make a knowledge check to see if you know any relevant lore that might reveal more about what's going on. And I guess I don't know that this necessarily fits into a player type, other than perhaps like at least a player type that's listed in the DMG, other than perhaps the puzzle solver, kind of like mystery solver type of approach. Because to me, what this particular answer indicates is there's somebody who's going to rely on the dice to help them run the game, or what's on their sheet to run the game, rather than acting with what they want to do first. It's definitely like what I'm guessing is going to be a little more of a kind of like hang back, like ride along, let the rest of the party kind of like take the initiative, but try and juice as much information and advantage as they can out of their dice rolls, as opposed to using their role playing to convince the DM why I should know something about that, which is that's also a valid play style, right? Like I sometimes have trouble with that kind of play style, because it's like it's the type of person who rolls dice and goes, well, I got a 27, so I should know something, right? And it's like I like to have those people say, like, tell me, like, why, what in your background would give you a reason to know who this bald guy in the red cloak is? Oh, well, I spent a lot of years traveling as a caravan guard, and doing a bad job of it, but I've seen a lot of things. So is there any possibility I've run across bald, any bald people in a black cloak or in a red cloak? So I'd like to try and like get those people out of their shell a little bit and help them engage in what I consider kind of like minor bits of either like character detail building or world building. Let them know that like just rolling the dice and getting a good result is one way of playing, but you can open up a world of possibilities if you decide to add more detail. So that just sort of like a little like checkbox. Like, this is maybe somebody who's like not confident in necessarily like either their role playing, or maybe they're not confident. Maybe they're just sort of introverted and they just don't want to. Role playing is a really intimidating, activity, and I am going to guess, especially if you're sitting down at a table where like I'm a professional actor and am going to role play voices and do stuff that's way off the script, and then you're sitting there watch like, can I keep up with that? Do I have to play to that level or whatever? And obviously the answer is no, I don't care. I just want you to play and have a good time on whatever level you choose. But some people, that's their way of enjoying the game, is as more of an intellectual puzzle to be solved, as opposed to an acting activity or an outlet for their creative imagination to spew forth, all of this lore or whatever. So that's all fine. Yeah, fuck what, I suppose that I could add ignore that guy. He looks sketchy, but I think that I don't know what that's going to tell tell me about their play style, other than they're probably going to get murdered early on, because the guy's pulling items from a scorched and burning wagon. Something doesn't seem to be right here. They're right. He probably is sketchy. And then finally, question: at the end of the season, I hope that my player character, 1, has a signature magic item, 2 is known and respected throughout the streets of Waterdeep. 3 outwitted the enemy with a cunning plan. 4 struck the killing blow against the big boss monster. Or 5 has mapped the spine of the world and touched the ghostly spires of ancient Netheril. And this also, in combination with the previous question, is a way of getting at what the play style is, right? So signature magic item, that tends to indicate to me that this player is going to be an optimizer who wants, you know, the best thing or a really cool thing, or they're going to be, you know, they find it really rewarding to have to invest unique attributes into their character, whatever that may be. They may want, you know, a Tressum as a pet. They may want like a cool set of tattoos or whatever it is. But to me, that's like, okay, they think about their character first and foremost. Like they want their character to definitely be a hero, right? Secondly, is known and respected throughout the streets of Waterdeep. So this says to me like this player is probably more of a role player / world builder. They care about their character's reputation, about having heroic deeds told about them, of becoming a part of the greater universe of the realms, right? So, you know, knowing that ahead of time really helps you kind of feed the monster of what they're going to enjoy. So not only is this a way to help determine what their player type is, but it also is a way to kind of key into what is their what's the juice that they get out of sitting down every night. Outwitted the enemy with a cunning plan. So again, if we look at our player archetypes, this goes back to kind of that like tactician, kind of puzzle solver type of guy. Thinking about it, like his whole thing may be not necessarily charging into the middle of the cavern and just starting to slaughter the masses of goblins, but it's definitely going to be like, let's survey more, let's pull off sort of a caper type of thing, or let's just use really good tactics and whatnot. So that's what that indicates to me, is like, okay, this is somebody who's a tactical thinker. They like to be challenged on an intellectual level. There's the downside of you may end up having 30 minutes where the group just starts getting it bogged down into like planning mode, and then nobody can kind of come to a decision. But you know, you've got to give those people who like that sort of thing the opportunity to employ, you know, to engage in tactics and analyzing the scenario and deciding, oh, here's the weak spots, let's try this. Struck the killing blow against the big boss monster. So this is the guy who is the combat, you know, kind of like, I don't want to say glory hog, but like they're the ones who like they get off on, you know, finding that critical hit, you know, in that clutch moment. It looks like it's going to be a TPK, or we're going up against a big bad guy, and you know, we torched him to the ground, right? So again, that in combination with the previous question gives you an idea of like, okay, this is a combat monster. I think a lot of play in Adventurers League is sort of predicated upon combat encounters, and that's one of the core pillars of D&D too, right? So not a surprise that this type of player is going to show up at Adventurers League. And then finally, I hope my PC has mapped the spine of the world and touched the ghostly spires of ancient Netheril. And the whole thing that this is getting at is, in the previous question, I didn't really have a scenario or a response here that drew out, okay, these are the explorer types in your group. These are the people who are like, oh man, and then we went, you know, way deep into the Underdark, and we chartered this boat across the Dark Lake with this weird Kuatoa, you know, ferryman guy, and we had to pay him in like halfling bones, which fortunately we had a halfling with us, you know, like. So they're the explorer types who want to go to like the unique places in the world and experience things that have not been seen, or unearth treasures that have been long buried and ancient. And I couldn't really get at that with the way that I set up the previous question. So that's the player questionnaire. If you guys have, you know, suggestions or questions, or if you decide to use this in your game, I would love to hear about it. You can hit me up on Twitter at Dungeon Bastard. We're going to start a Reddit subforum for this. Gaurav has already set up a saving throw subreddit just for saving throw show. And so I think we might fork off a Storm King's Thunder disorganized play subreddit so that we can kind of keep things a little bit neat and organized and separate. But I'll tweet out more information about that. But if you decide to use this, let me know how it works. If you have changes to it, or input on it, I'd love to hear it. So that's our PC questionnaire. So our next thing that we're going to talk about, PC bonds. So last time I talked about, Gaurav mentions that it's r/saving throw show. So thank you, sir. Very good. Oh, you can't share links. Oh, let me see if I can share one. Saving throw show. Oh man, it totally happened. All right, I will put it in the chat right now. I have the power. Oh, well, Mace did it. All right, very good. All right, so the next thing up, I talked about using Dungeon World bonds in a D&D game last time, and I'm really a fan of these things. And so I sat down today and I put together a list of PC bonds for Storm King's Thunder. I mean, I wish Wizards would incorporate these things, but it seems like blatant thievery. So on the other hand, I understand why it's not something to do. And also, the book has to have a certain page count, right? So the great thing about what we're doing here with Disorganized Play is the book can only be 256 pages long, but we have the whole internet to fill up. So we can generate as much like ancillary material as we want. So that's terrific. So I'm not going to walk through all of these bonds. I don't want to eat that kind of time, but there is a PDF in the Saving Throw Files folder that has what I'm going to use for bonds for my party. And these things do two things. All right, you're going to look. These are going to be slightly different than your average Dungeon World bonds because Dungeon World bonds are a little more open-ended, I guess, or I don't want to say grandiose in a pejorative manner. I just think that sometimes it's like, when it's something like, blank and I have been tested in fire and the earth shall tremble at our passing, like, that's awesome. But I wanted to get a little more specific with what I did with this because Dungeon World obviously is designed for a very open world, a very collaborative process between the players and the GM, and it's not written for really a specific, defined, necessarily world, right? But this we can customize specifically for the Forgotten Realms and specifically for this adventure. So some of these things are just generic, like good relationship buildings between the PC that I think will be quick and helpful and neat. And I'm going to give 2 bonds to each player and say, like, pick 6 off of this list, or pick 1 off of this list of 6 and pick 1 off of this list of 6. So like blank always has my back when things go wrong. That's just a nice, creates a bond between those players and those player characters, and you know what's happening, right? I threw a bundle into Waterdeep Harbor for blank, no questions asked. They owe me a favor. Like, that's open-ended and cool and fun. But the first 6 are a little more, well, actually, most of them are more specific to the realms. And the first 6 in particular really, I've tried to tie them into what's going to happen in the adventure, right? So something happened in Daggerford, that's fine. The second one, against my better judgment, blank convinced me to take pity on a shield dwarf named Larg just outside of Red Larch. When we woke up, the dwarf was gone, and so were the 2 hand axes I'd inherited from my great-grandfather. Okay, so what's going on here is that because I've read ahead 3 chapters, I know that I'm going to send them to Triboar, or Tribor. I like to say Triboar. You're going to have to deal with it. I'm planning to send them to Triboar because I think the quest lines coming out of Triboar are cooler than the other two possibilities. I like the battle at Bryn Shander better, but the quest lines coming out of Tribe War are better, and it's okay. Like it's kind of like just a dirty little town off in the middle of nowhere, so that could be kind of fun, like defend the small town against the fire giants. Point being, I know one of the quests that comes out of there is you get the bounty to go hunt down the Weevil if you so choose. In this PC bond, Larg is the fake name that the Weevil is using when he hangs out in Xanthoryn's Keep or whatever it's called. Wherever he's hanging out, like he's using the pseudonym of Larg. So now, if my players are paying attention, like they know, like they don't necessarily know who this guy is, but this quest has now sort of been backgrounded for them, so that when they do run into the bounty for the Weevil, like they might recognize the drawing because they've two of them have had an encounter with this guy, or when they get to town, they may be able to like go, Larg, hey, that's the same guy. And then, as it turns out, Larg has 2 magical hand axes that he stole from the PC, right? So I don't like to set stuff up that's going to pay off 4 months down the line. 15 sessions later. Like it might take that long to get there, but I tend to find that players forget this type of stuff, and I don't. I know I as a player tend to forget this type of stuff. But if they pay attention, at least they can go, oh yeah. Like they don't need to know this in order to solve the quest. But if they do go on the quest, it's going to to crank out some kind of like extra benefits for them. The same thing with this 3-dragon ante thing, and they have an elkskin pack. All right, so that's if you look at these actually go back to either the quest or the PC who gives the quest at the end of the Tribe War encounter stuff, right? This thing about Meltimer's Murata, that's Urgala, I don't remember her first name, but Urgala Meltimer, like that might trip off something. So those 3 in particular, like those get you to some quest lines and have a payoff later. And I'm like, why not be specific? Like, why not tie them into the world using these things? So these aren't necessarily like the best Dungeon World bonds in terms of like forging a deep relationship that's either based on like animosity or you're bonded over an experience that you had growing up when you were kids or whatever it is, but it does help tie the PC into the hooks of the adventure and the world of the adventure. The other one that's in here that I think is probably important is that one of these things is Blank and I got kidnapped by or captured by wood elves in the Misty Forest, and we would never have escaped, but a shield dwarf named Morak Urgrey convinced them to let us go. Now Morak that's the guy that they're going to run into in Nightstone, right? Like, or at least in the Dripping Caves. So like that particular hook of little information. Like now we've got somebody who, like 2 players who know that guy, and to me that's what's important, is giving them some ties. Not necessarily about reasons they should care about these NPCs. They might, I mean, I would hope they would care about Morak after, penciling in this experience. But at least like, oh, that name's familiar. Oh, yeah. And no, actually, you know what? I hate the thing of like, oh, do I recognize this guy? I'm gonna make a history check. I would rather than have them go, oh, you know what? That's right. I've got this bond here. Now they might forget about it. Okay, fine. But that's the deal with the bonds. I'm going to use these, like I said, I'm going to pick 6 that are kind of the questy, very tight world buildy things, and then I'm gonna break out the other 6 that are a little more generic, always has my back when things go wrong, and split it up into 2 and just say pick one from this side of the page, you pick one from this side of the page. It's only 2, but I think it'll give the party some hooks into each other and hooks into the game world. So that's that. All right. My GM's kit. Let's talk about that. I want to get one thing here quick. two things. Okay, so what are a couple of things that I need? Number one, as I mentioned last time, index cards are your best friend for just about everything, but particularly making PC table tents that have their name, their armor class, their passive perception, class and race, all that kind of stuff on them, and then, as we discussed last time, being able to just sort of float those things around so that when a fight comes up, you have your initiative order right there. That's great. The other thing that, there's two other things. So as I discussed last time, I have Volo's Guide to Waterdeep. I don't think I will have this at the table, but this is actually, you know, these books I might take with me to game night and just, if I need to slug them open, I'll slug them open. They're a little bit hard to navigate, I've found. So they're more of a research. They're more of a research and background tool for me than necessarily like a must-have resource to have at the table. On the other hand, like if one of the quest lines sends them to Waterdeep, I will definitely be bringing this book. The other book that I got is Volo's Guide to the North, and I just got it today, so I haven't really had a chance to crack it open. But it is a little more. It talks about the Desrin Valley and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's some source material that was used to put together the new thing. So that's another thing that's in my GM's kit. I always like to have something to award inspiration, and I will say, like right up front, like I'm a fan of liberally awarding inspiration. I don't believe that that you should be too stingy with inspiration, especially in an Adventurers League game, because in my experience with Adventurers League, the more that you give inspiration, the faster free-flowing the game ends up being. So I like to award inspiration, and I like to have tokens that represent inspiration. So anybody who follows Dungeon Bastard on Twitter knows that I'm a huge fan of campaign coins. They have a variety of things, including a Dungeon Bastard coin that you can use. I also picked up these neat 13th Age at Gen Con this year, 13th Age icon tokens, and these are all the same one, but they're hefty, but they're colorful. I'm a fan, so I think I might use these this year. So have some tokens for inspiration. I'm not going to have any miniatures. And then the other thing that I'm planning to have is a monster list. I didn't get a chance to type this up before the stream started, but if we look at the adventure and what we're probably going to encounter in that first session, I just made a quick monster list because the stats aren't there, right? It just says bold-faced, like goblin, like they saved themselves some and you know, legitimately so. They saved themselves some page count by not including the stats for goblins on every single page. But so I have a list: goblin, warg, specter, spy, flying snake, guards, flying sword. Before I run my session tomorrow, I'm either going to print those off, or most of this stuff is from in the SRD, so I'm going to probably cut and paste it into a little digest-sized monster list, and that way I have all the stats, and I don't have to bring my monster manual. I don't want to lug 5 books around if I can at all avoid it. I want maybe a PHB so I can look up spells. And that and the adventure are the only 2 hardcovers that I really want to be dragging. So I'm going to put together the monster list. I will let you guys. I'll put that in the Dropbox folder. So if you are interested, just stay tuned. I just have to get it typed up. So that's I can't think of anything else that I'm going to put in my GM's kit that's super important. I do like to have a variety of magic markers because I do like to write names in bolder print than what I necessarily write the stats, or I'm just kind of an office supply nerd anyhow, so that's me. All right. So let's talk about the adventure intro. So let's actually get into the meat and bones a little bit, everybody. All right. So let's. Well, I'm going to. I'm going to keep talking, I guess. Exciting times. All right. So, point being, I'm going to. So, just to recap, I'm not sure where we got cut off with the stream. Um, do. Always weird when you're not sure if the audience has caught back up with you or not. So. All right. So some people are here, some people are back. Some people got to go. Cool. All right. So that's the deal. All right. Let me back up. So I was talking about giving the party better hooks for sending them to Nightstone. And so I'm going to just give them a courier mission which they can fulfill and then do whatever they want with. But specifically, I'm going to give them a courier mission to contact Morak, right? So that's, to me, it's like, why not go directly for the NPC who's going to end up being involved anyhow, right? I mean, I thought about either giving them ties to some of the families that have been captured, or, maybe giving them a letter to deliver or something like that. But that seems a little corny. I'm like, let's get to the heart of the action, because they're probably not going to find Morak for 2 or 3 sessions anyhow. But let's foreground him, especially because he gives the next pieces of the quest and whatnot. So let's tie him in. All right, so that's happening. All right. So the next part of the adventure that I really think needs a little bit of review when you're sitting down to run your first session is the timeline, right? So according to what's stated at the beginning of the chapter, 3 days ago, this cloud giant castle shows up and starts bombarding the village with boulders. Fine and cool. So from what we can piece together, the villagers, panic. The bridge to the main keep is knocked out, and so they all go and evacuate to the dripping caverns, and then end up getting captured by the goblins there. But that was 3 nights ago, 3 days ago. So theoretically, 3 days have passed, right? The way that the scenario presents to the town, it's as if the goblins have been there for 6 hours or something like that, and have only just begun kind of looting the place. So that's a little bit of chronological dissonance that I'm not sure how to rectify, other than maybe I feel like, in these types of situations, the GM can always come up with an answer. You just have to kind of like put your pencil to it. But it's not one of those situations where you go, well, that doesn't make sense, and then it's like, like, you can always make something make sense. It's a world of fantasy where giant reptilian creatures fly around and breathe fire. Logic does not have to play a direct point A to point B kind of role. So I think I'm going to keep the timeline as it is, at essentially like 2 or 3 days, but I want to change the attitude of a lot of the encounters of the people who are in there, right? So specifically, the goblins can be goof-offs. That's fine. Some of the stuff, like he's just managed to kind of collect this giant pile of food and is having trouble carrying it away. Again, like, to me, that indicates a timeline of they've been there for hours rather than they've had 3 days to kind of ransack this place. So I'm not sure. I think the goblins may, I may paint them as a little bit of stuff like more that they're sort of like reveling in the fact that they've captured the town. They're a little bit drunk on power, if not outright drunk on stuff that they have raided. So that also gives me like plenty of outs for bad tactics, poor response times, not acting logically when the PCs maybe like, step their foot into something that they shouldn't. But, I think, they've had plenty of time to do like what I would consider dumb goblin stuff, which is graffiti the town or whatever, make a mess in the kitchen, like all that kind of stuff. So Abstruse brings up the question, why worry about this gang of jerks in the town when the dude paying you is still missing? You're not going to be able to kind of figure that out until you get into town, right? Like, you won't really know that until you go to Nightstone and find out that Morak is missing or that he's not holed up in the keep or whatever. You're probably going to have to explore the town a little bit because you don't find out where anyone has gone until the guards tell you that he's taken off. And also, I think, hopefully they have a moral imperative to, like, let's clean these goblins out of this town and, like, make this place safe. And, you also might want to consider, like, what time of day that you set this. If you set this very late afternoon, then it might not be advisable for the party to go off wandering in the dark looking for the people or not. I don't know. But yeah, so that's something to consider is like, well, if we find out that Morak's not here, like, why should we stay in town? Number one, the town's not that big. It's not going to take that much effort to secure it. And also, he could be anywhere within the town. That does bring up one point that I think is a little weird in terms of Morak. And it's this whole idea that if you go into Morak's bedroom in Nightstone, you find his locked chest that has a suit of chainmail sized for a dwarven helm, a bag of gold, and some gems, and then a potion of heroism. And the issue there for me is, like, if he's leading this, grand kind of like, let's escape and hole up in the caves, why wouldn't he take that stuff with him? Did he just not have time? Like, that's a plausible excuse. He didn't have time. In which case, like, you definitely want to, like, leave hints around town that, everything's, like, been left in a state of haste or half finished. There's the classic, there's still, a raw pie sitting on the counter next to the stove, and, the wood is burned out in the stove and all that kind of stuff. So you may want to leave hints and evidence that that the town has been very hastily abandoned. The other thing that I've considered is that instead of whatever sort of like bootleg dwarven ale that Morak is getting from Waterdeep, maybe he commissioned this stuff to be shipped to him, and if the party actually bothers to check the casks for what they're delivering, they could find this stuff there. I don't know, it just seems curious to me that the one guy who actually has his head screwed on straight doesn't even bother to take his helmet or his potion of heroism, which seems like a no-brainer. But again, it goes back to the Occam's razor. Let's cut the Gordian knot here and just say it all happened too fast. They had to get out. So that's fine. It does seem a little weird. Same thing in the next room with Kella, just sort of hiding out there. She's been there for 3 days. Like, has she scrounged food? Has she picked off a couple goblins? Has she not picked off a couple goblins? I think that would actually make for a far more interesting encounter with Kella, is that she's managed to either like strangle or crossbow bolt a couple of goblins, and their corpses are hanging in a closet in one of the other guest bedrooms or something like that. So that's by all rights, if she's going to pretend to be like a victim and then
is struggling to kind of like remember what happened or have trouble, you know, then the timeline of 3 days is like you should probably be like really hungry and really thirsty unless you've been scavenging for food and you're desperate and in a panic. Um, that doesn't mean she can't pull that off, but it's a potential pitfall where the characters, um, the players may go, oh, wait, this happened 3 days ago? It seems like they just got here. So you're going to have to do a little bit of kind of like burnishing the message of that they left in haste, or these goblins are really kind of out of control and clearly have sort of settled in, or it's just sort of become kind of like it's got kind of like an open party kind of thing. The final part of this whole thing, or the final part where all this timeline stuff kind of ties in, is if the party gets to the keep and talks to the guards. To me, these just have to be the most like chicken-livered guards who are like afraid of, traumatized, afraid. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. We don't know what to do next. It says in the adventure that they're looking for somebody who's a strong leader. So, like, to me, these are the peon guys who are like, I pulled guard duty because it was easy. I just have to walk back and forth for 3 hours and not really do anything that actually involves leaving the keep and fighting. So that's something to think about, is like play those people as genuinely terrified, afraid, maybe like challenging who goes there, but without any teeth behind it, that sort of thing. That those guards, because they convey so much of the backstory of what's happened here and kind of lay out where to go next and what to do, I think it's going to be important to play them in a way that's believable. Like, well, we know this stuff, but like, there's only 4 of us. We can't leave the. If we leave the keep, we'll get picked off. Look at all those goblins out there. Like, who knows, when is that castle going to come back? Also, I think it might be worthwhile to have some players who know something about Nightstone, or know why they pulled this. Not necessarily know why they. Not necessarily know why they. Not necessarily know why they pulled the monolith out of the ground, but know that there was one there and it was studied. Like, that could be another potential party hook. Is like, oh, you're supposed to like go to the monolith in Nightstone and do some rubbings of the runes and examine them against this book of reference material and see if you can kind of ascertain what the origin of them are. And that might be a way to kind of like very subtly, slowly, kind of like slip some giant lore in there without necessarily having to give away a lot of adventure keys and whatnot. Yeah, so Aaron brings up the point. I was under the impression that the goblins did only arrive a few hours ago and they just showed up to find an empty town after the giant attack. I think that's true, but I don't know that they specifically came a few hours ago. Once the village was abandoned, 4 cloud giants descended from the sky, uprooted the Nightstone, and took it back. Yeah, so here's the part where the timeline doesn't really mesh with that idea that the goblins just showed up later. The villagers abandon the building and go to the caves, right? They go to the Dripping Caverns. They get ambushed by goblins and ogres, and Hark, the goblin boss, interrogates them, learns of the giant attack, and sent a band of his goblins to plunder the abandoned village. So if the villagers left 3 months ago, or 3 days ago, because the sky is literally falling, we got to get out of town, let's go to the caverns, and then we're ambushed and attacked. Okay, I could see Hark waiting maybe like a day to interrogate these people and then send a force out there. But I don't see him waiting 3 days to make that happen. Now, you have the option to make the different choice and give him a reason to wait 3 days. Maybe he wants to make sure that, he had to send a scouting party and make sure that the giants were no longer there, etc. Alternately, I think we have an interesting opportunity here to promote one of our goblin minions into kind of like Hark's right-hand man, who's out to prove himself and and he's supposed to be in charge of looting the town and bring back tribute to Hark, who's the boss. So the goblins and the giant attack are not directly related. Like the goblins are not working in league with the giants. That is definitely true. But the way that the timing is set up in the adventure, it's the giants attack, the villagers leave, the villagers get attacked, the goblins send people back to send a force back to the village to take it over. So again, the timeline is a little bit wonky here. That's fine, whatever. You just have to account for it. I do think, like I said, I think there's an opportunity there for one of the goblins to be the sub commander. Let's give them like a little bit more of a command structure, but not necessarily one that's smart or organized. Or maybe the guy who's in command is just bad. Like it's a goblin who's not good at being in command, and he's off on his own for the first time away from Boss Hark, and he's kind of just living it. So that's the main thing that I'm looking at in terms of running this as an intro scenario is. I want to get the feel right so that the timeline makes some sense if the players manage to piece it together. I want to give them I also want to give them a little bit of a reason to either some sort of perception check or something like that to figure out before they get to town. Oh, okay, something's wrong. Something's not right. They give all these hints about the drawbridge is down, but nobody's on the towers. I want the players to kind of have an opportunity to clue into that before they get into town. Some of this box text is a little, I don't know, it just serves the purpose of being box text of you've been traveling on the road and there's a sign up ahead, and then it ends, and it's why don't you just graph that box text right onto the next thing, because the next box text is, okay, you've traveled up ahead. Okay. I'm not opposed to box text, but in cases where they leave a break, but the next section just automatically either assumes or picks up right where the last section left off, I'm like, why didn't you just graft it together? don't give the players the false choice of, do you continue down the road to Nightstone like you're supposed to? Because two things happen. Either one, they're like, yeah, and they look at you like you're stupid, or they sit down and they go, oh, wait a minute, hey, we're getting close, should we do something? And then you have a 15-minute discussion about how they should do something for something that was it turns out they travel 10 miles down the road. So that's what I'm looking at. I think the Spectre encounter is something, and the graveyard is something that maybe pay attention to, because I think that might be a little more dangerous than a first level party may be able to handle. On the other hand, it is bounded by, if they leave the cemetery, the thing does not chase them. It also seems to be there to just sort of punish especially greedy players, and that's okay. Not everybody admittedly, grave robbing is a fundamental cornerstone of Dungeons and Dragons, but you don't necessarily have to do it in this small village where nobody's done anything wrong to deserve it, right? They're not an ancient empire that's fated or anything like that. So that's what I've got. So if you guys, I'll do a few minutes of open questions if you guys have questions or concerns about the first session. I'm looking forward to the first game. I'm looking forward to dropping these bonds on people. I think the player questionnaire is going to help me get a feel for my table. It may not have an immediate payoff, but it's going to definitely help me kind of down the road as I pull things together, get dialed in for what play style my players enjoy and what sort of rewards in the game I can weave in and tailor to help them pay off, especially in things that are intangibles, some players, they're going to think it's a big deal to get a title, or a mark of prestige, and some players are going to be like, I want a +4 sword or whatever it is. +4 sword, what kind of Monty Hall GM is this? So yeah, so if you guys have questions or something like that, please do share our videos. I think we're going to probably get cut into 2 pieces here because we had the little snafu with the internet. become a Twitch subscriber. I will post some links to that Dropbox folder. Again, like all the stuff that I'm doing for Chapter 1 is free and clear, and you can access it just because you're a fan of the show. Going forward, I may have little bits of free stuff that have dropped, but I want to put my notes and other assets that I personally craft for my game together and package them for things that are available to our Patreon backers. And I have to talk with Dom. I'm not sure what level that's going to be, but that's just a way so that the work that I'm doing is something that also benefits the show in a little more tangible way. So there you go. So I want to thank you guys for joining us. Abstruse has a question. How do you handle when the PCs have more information about the game world than the players would have without turning it into a 15-minute lecture on Faerun history? Well, I guess part of that for me is I'm not an expert on the Forgotten Realms. It's a little overwhelming, the amount of material that TSR timeline straight, and it's been rebooted, and and I have the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. I haven't plowed through it in page by page by page detail. So they're frankly going to ask me questions that I'm not necessarily able to answer. But I think you can just paint things in general terms, and also give them the opportunity to kind of plug in wherever they want to plug in. So, Waterdeep is kind of like the major urban center this side of the Forgotten Realms, and that can be their big city that almost anything that you can describe is probably taken place at one point or another in Waterdeep. So if you want to make them, and I've kind of put it into the PC bonds that you want to make them harder than your average bumpkin who you might encounter on the high road. Fine, go ahead and do that. But if you also want to make them bumpkins, then that's fine too. You can make there's the one thing that I've kind of gleaned from reading through the adventure so far is that there's a lot of just little backwater places that are just little farm towns that they have people come through, but why? Yeah, well, and then some nobles came up from Waterdeep. They went hunting for stag, and one of them got bumped off. I think there's because the distances traveled are so huge. I think there's really kind of an opportunity for that small town. Well, I don't know. I've heard stories, but I don't know much about that place. That's what I would do in the case where the PC has more information. And I'm always a fan of, okay, well, you studied with somebody, your old mentor told you stories of, you've heard tales of the wise old women of the village had an anecdote about a weird floating one-eyed creature that had these tentacle stalk eyes, etc., etc., etc. So I think I've seen it in the game where people will say, well, give me a wisdom or intelligence check, or give me a knowledge roll, or you kind of cherry pick off the skill list. I think that's the only danger to that, where you're trying to help feed them information. The only danger to that is then if they have a botched roll, then everybody just goes, I guess I don't know anything. It's like, well, okay, all right, you did roll a 7. How am I going to tell you? So I think in those cases where they have to have some sort of piece of background information that feels like the party's absolutely missing, like in terms of history or whatever, I think it's okay to just tell them straight out, oh, okay, so, find the most appropriate character, or maybe somebody who hasn't had the spotlight shined on them, and tell them, you know what, Marnoth, you remember that you had an old swordsman coach, old fencing coach who trained you on this stuff, but afterwards you would have these long kind of cool down sessions where he'd sit around and when he'd get a couple of ales in him, he kept talking about this long lost Citadel Felbar place. It was full of dwarves. It was way up north. It was very cold, very isolated. But he knew some guys there that he really trusted. You don't exactly remember what the name was. So, yeah. So that's one way I guess I would try and handle the whole. PCs have information that the players don't necessarily know. I don't think you can count on some players. Honestly, I think I have more of an issue with players. The flip side of it, which is the players know a lot more than I do about what's going on in the game world. Which creates great. Like, I mean, you can use, like, okay, I'm appointing you official, like, Scald of the party. You're the reference book. You're the resource. You're the scribe that we can draw upon your years of knowledge and playing in the realms. Bear with me when I get things wrong. But also, it's a rebooted world. Not everything that they know is going to be 100%. Doesn't hurt to do some bedtime reading either. So that's going to wrap it for me today. I'm sorry we had a couple of technical issues and got started just a little bit late today. Again, I'm planning to do these every Tuesday from roughly 2 to 3, so the same basic time. And then I'm going to do a recap session on Thursdays for about an hour, talking about how the game went, what I felt like went well, what I felt went poorly, and maybe kind of like where either things that I adjusted did not pan out or need a little burnishing, or some kind of like dangling issues like, okay, I think they're headed here next. These are some things I'm going to think about as I'm gearing up to prep my next session. So this is actually, the original one was a 2-hour show, but we're going to split that 2 hours into more digestible chunks. So Tuesdays will be a roughly hour-long prep session. Let's talk about what's going to happen next. And then Wednesdays, I run the game offline at my local game store. And Thursdays, we're going to do an hour, probably like 4 to 5, doing a recap of, hey, here's what happened last night. Let's check in on how things went in your games, etc. So I really want this to be a collaborative process, as I've said it before, and I honestly really do mean it. So if you are a GM for Storm King's Thunder, or you know a GM, I would love to hear from you guys and hear your thoughts on the things that I've put together. Take a look at the stuff that you've maybe put together. It's a collaborative process. Let's share and leverage each other's efforts here as we launch into Season 5 of Adventures League with Storm King's Thunder. So, thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Tom Lommel. You can follow me at Dungeon Bastard. That is all of my RPG stuff. Every once in a while, you'll see me tweet from my personal account. If you're not interested in politics or pictures of my adorable greyhound, then you don't need to follow that account, because that's 90% of what that is, and the occasional weird thing that crosses my feed. So once again, thank you for joining me. Please tell your friends. Please subscribe, either on YouTube or on Twitch or both. Tell your friends and neighbors. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you on Thursday. Coming up at 4 o'clock, Jordan Callerman is playing Click and Play Adventures. So tune in here, and we'll be right back in just half an hour. All right, thanks a lot, and take care.